We move now to the perspective of the in-situ observations that will be covered by Chiara. Thank you, Chiara.
Yeah, you're welcome.
The floor is yours.
I'm stepping in for Renuka, but I actually represent here the Ocean Ice Project. And my name is Chiara, so welcome everybody. I hope you can see the first slide. If you can confirm shortly, would be nice. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So my name is Chiara. I'm actually a project manager of a number of projects that are run and coordinated by the Danish Meteorological Institute. This is where I work together with Erika. So basically at the Institute, we run a number of research and innovation projects that have been funded by the Commission, mostly under the Horizon Europe program, which is the main program in Europe for research and innovation. And specifically today, I got the head of the Ocean Ice one, which is funded partly by Horizon Europe and partly by the UK Research and Innovation. So in the next 10 minutes, my goal is actually to give you some ideas about this topic, the complementarity of the ocean observations in situ for monitoring the ocean from the ocean. Why this is important and why monitoring the ocean from the ocean is key, because the ocean is one of the major players of the weather and climate change and is mostly opaque to satellite observations. So only in-situ observations can provide information on the state and dynamics of the ocean. Roberto has been mentioning, for instance, the ESA initiatives, but there is also the Copernicus program, which is one of the main programs that has been focusing on integrating atmospheric and ocean analysis and reanalysis, and basically providing a number of service providers like public organizations like my organization with information on to assess basically the natural and climate change related risks, as well as the state of the climate. So basically improving not only the scientific understanding, but also developing solutions for adapting and mitigating basically the risks of climate change. So Copernicus is one of these programs, but there are also some modeling capabilities provided by other organizations in Europe, like ECMWF, for instance, but also Mercator Ocean. You might hear these words somewhere else, also in other workshops. And these kind of monitoring capabilities are quite envied, and they set an examples worldwide, also for countries like many of you come from the United States, I've heard from your accent. So basically, they give us the possibility to monitor the ocean from the ocean. And this is the goal is basically to try to increase the awareness in the society, but also decision-making level, but also sharing ocean and climate knowledge information and sharing also methodologies, technologies, and best practices across wider communities, also beyond Europe. Just to give you some ideas of what I'm talking about. And this is like, I saw this picture in other slides as well, so bear with me if I show it again. But the ocean monitoring can be based on different tools and technologies. So basically, this beautiful infographic comes from Ocean Ops. The credits, they go to Thomas Hessig. And this is an example of a potential coastal ocean observing network that is using multiple technologies to gather data. Many instruments are in this infographic, but some of them are even missing. So you might understand how crowded sometimes the monitoring observation is. And this is why we are building this kind of technology network, but also we are creating larger networks of collaborations, not only in Europe, but also beyond Europe. And this kind of key network of observations are needed because we need to build a solid base of data that we can share, where we can then feed into climate assessments, state of the ocean assessments, and so on. So they're all needed this data for ending somewhere and being picked up by somebody else. And basically, the Commission has been funded through a number of initiatives, not only those that are actually permanent organizations, but also like temporary initiatives, a number of projects that have promoted the collaboration beyond the European borders. For instance, some of these networks are looking at the Atlantic, and some of them are even mentioned on these slides. So the Rapid MOCA, the OSNAP, SAMOC, they've been partly contributed also by smaller projects where I've been working in the past. And these networks have been actually promoting the technology and enhancing the capabilities of technology also beyond the borders of a single state. For instance, also here the Argo 2030 profiling float program is quite important because it gets the contribution of different funding schemes from nations. But the entire goal of these collaborations is actually to create a global ocean observing system and then a global climate observing system, and to provide actually essential information for the state of the climate. So to feed into reports that you've seen somewhere else, like the IPCC report, Copernicus reports, and the World Meteorological Organization assessment reports. So Anna will explain also some of these later in her intervention. But basically, for you to understand, these are the main source of information for nations to make risk assessments and then to take decisions, again, on climate adaptation plans and to adopt also solutions, practical solutions. I want to go a little bit further. So this is a snapshot of 2018. So this is almost 6 years ago. And of all the different global observations spots that correspond to in-situ observations in the oceans. So Roberto was also mentioning that there is a bit of a scarcity of observations in the North Pole and the South Pole. So this is something that you can see here. The dots are getting a bit more difficult to locate in some areas. But this is just to give you an idea of how dense basically the entire system is and how this one is basically then as well funded by different organizations at different times. So, but despite of this density of all these different dots, we are still facing some challenges and some of, let's say, something is still missing, so that we need to work a little bit more as well on some topics. And I think by looking at what, let's say, my colleagues have been doing in the past 15 years, this is how long more or less I've been working in research support. There is still a lack of integrated observing networks because this is limiting our ability to mitigate the effects, but also the long-term implications of the climate change in strategic regions, for instance, the polar regions. There are also isolated efforts of single projects, for instance, that have been working on ameliorating, for instance, the Arctic observations networks. Arctic Passion is one of these projects, also funded by Horizon. Another example is the project that I represent today, Ocean Ice, which is also trying to fill in the gaps related to the interaction between the Southern Ocean and the Antarctic ice sheet. And this has got the direct, let's say, benefits at some point also for predicting the future of sea level rise, but also on the tipping points and also on the wider global change. And Xavier will go back on the tipping points later, and Anna also on the effects of the wider global climate, so I'm not going further into this topic. But I would like to focus on the remaining 2 points of this list. One point is actually the accessibility and standardization of data for interoperability under basically a fair framework across different countries. So we need to have is actually an agreed framework of harmonized data that we are able to enhance also data interoperability and accessibility. This means that the integration of data and products is relevant for the decision support system. And we need to have a strong, solid base of data to promote not only the future research, but also to develop what is called the digital twin of the Earth. And also this is possible only if the data are interoperable and accessible. So having a sort of standardized approach in not only in Europe, but let's say worldwide, is something that is a long-term effort, but is still far away from being fully realized. And FAIR is one set of guidelines, basically that all research projects are compliant to, at least in Europe, but it's a worldwide FAIR protocol that needs also to be supported to go in this direction. And the last point is actually something related to the funding, because it's true that most of the efforts in terms of monitoring the ocean, they are based on national efforts, with some exceptions like the funding that is provided by the European Union. But it's true also that for building these networks and keeping them alive for a longer time, so that data can be produced over decades, is something that is missing. So there is a little bit of, let's say, synchronization that needs to have and to take place. And this is also something that has been evidenced in, let's say, in at international levels, for instance, at the UNFCCC, but also in the IPCC. And this is where kind of we need to head to, especially when we need to work on the essential climate variables. This was also a term that Roberto has been mentioning before, but also the essential ocean variables to be able to decide to guide the decision making, to provide evidence for the decision making. And in some of these regions, these kind of activities are a bit more complicated because they're not populated enough, or this is more difficult to observe, for instance, the Arctic and the Antarctic. And this is something that we are kind of supporting with a number of smaller projects. But as I said, there is still work to do. And I just wanted to mention 4 different projects. They are in different maturity stages. But this is something where I would like you maybe to keep an eye when you're going back home and you're trying to Google a little bit what's happening in this kind of new projects or kind of almost closed projects. The first one is the one that I mentioned several times, Ocean Ice. This is a pan-Atlantic European ocean observing system for set up for implementing and integrating the observing efforts, especially in the polar regions. There is a little bit of activity in the Arctic, but it's mostly related to the Antarctic and the Southern Ocean. It's a kind of 2 ways into its life. And normally these projects are run for 4 years. So we are like in month 18 now, so there's still a lot to do in this project, but the results are very promising. Arctic Passion is another project that has been funded by the European Commission through Horizon. And this is still working on the observations in the Arctic, so specifically on strengthening the Arctic observations also together with the local stakeholders. It's a very interesting project. It's almost finishing. And then there is the CSIC project, which has been creating a network of observations specifically in the Southern Ocean. So for some aspects, it goes hand in hand with Ocean Ice. The last one is something that we kicked off basically also with Erica last month. And this is also funded by the European Commission by Horizon Europe. And this is a project that will develop an assessment process for improving the observing capabilities, meeting societal needs, and focusing especially on ocean, on the sea level rise, the marine heat waves, the sea ice extent and variability. And the project will also provide the feed for basically international climate assessments with inputs on essential climate variables and essential ocean variables. And Anna will talk a little bit about this later. So this is like my very humble overview. And if you would like to follow at least Ocean Ice, you have here the links. So and the other projects, they all have websites and a lot of results that are in open access and data that are all fair, so they are publicly accessible. And I would like now to stop here and then give the floor back to Christina to go to the next speaker. Thank you so much.